Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to FrackingSENSE. I might be just a minute or two early, which I guess I should have thought about that before I picked up the microphone and interrupted your conversation. So, really, I can't imagine anyone arriving late is going to be stricken with sadness that they missed my introduction. I think they would be sad to miss this. So I shall, I guess we should be celebrating April 15th. That's pretty good. And when you go to Washington and you go by the Internal Revenue Service building, and on the facade there, it's got Oliver Wendell Holmes's memorable remark, "Taxes are what we pay for a civilized society." I'm not sure how well that's working out as an investment, but it's a nice idea. Public servant, you understand taxes and taxation and reasons for that. I actually was kind of struck by that when I saw that, IRS. So this event is made possible by a grant from the National Science Foundation Sustainability Research Network, the AirWaterGas project. Houston, my husband, has given us, in case you struggle with how to remind yourself to say Sustainability Research Network AirWaterGas, you can say SEREN-AWOG is the acronym for that. So SEREN-AWOG, and then you are referring to our project, and nobody in the world will know what you've said or why you said it. So welcome to the SEREN-AWOG sponsored event. This is a project on hydraulic fracturing and natural gas development, and this leads to my regular remark that the National Science Foundation does not endorse and is not burdened with responsibility for anything said in this series. I'm eager to acknowledge our co-sponsor for the FrackingSENSE series, the Boulder County Commissioners and staff. Here is the opening instruction that some of you have heard to satiation. While we recognize that this is a controversial topic, our goal is to make it possible for everyone to hear the speaker. So we anticipate and welcome moments of disagreement. But if you disagree with something the speaker says tonight, we ask that you accept the constraints of channeling your disagreement into what we at the Center call respiratory protest. That is, we encourage you to sigh with exasperation, to snort with skepticism, to sniff with contempt. That's a new one, that one I just added in there. And if you are really in a mood, you may hiss. But all of those expressions will not disturb the powers of your neighbor to hear the speaker. So for some reason that just cracked them up in Greeley last night. They really liked that quite a bit last night. But then they all began hissing at me while I was saying it, so that didn't work out. So, tonight, okay, that's very appropriate. Tonight we will follow also the usual drill of asking you to write down your questions, and in 15 or 20 minutes, the American West people will begin circulating and picking up your questions, and I will then begin furiously sorting and categorizing away. And this is a good occasion to remember to say that this event has been, like every other Center American West enterprise, part of an excellent team. Kurt Gutjahr, our managing director, and Honey Lindbergh, and Ronnie Iris, and Emily Haber, and so a very fine group of people. And Ashley was somewhere, but Ashley is there. Ashley's right there. And so I could not really, at this stage in life, I'm so dependent on this group, I could not cross the street really without knowing that this excellent team was there. What you're going to do about me crossing the street, I don't know, but you would save me if I got in trouble in that street. So I appreciate that. And this will be this might be the last time I perform this ritual of sorting as fast as I can with the questions. In other words, this may be the last FrackingSENSE talk, but then again, this may not be the last FrackingSENSE talk. We would welcome your thoughts about this, so we invite you to use your comment sheets in the programs to offer, you can cross out the other items or questions there, and offer your suggestions and recommendations on future programs on oil and gas development and hydraulic fracturing. You can suggest future individual speakers. You can suggest some sort of innovative and adventurous form of panel discussions. You can propose role plays, or for that matter, interpretive dance or a poetry slam. We will read your suggestions carefully, and please feel free to check it back in with us to see what might be coming next. I should mention that we do know that we will be taking FrackingSENSE to other communities in the state. We opened last night in Greeley with a program at UNC, and we will be back in Greeley with a program on air quality and public health on April 28th, and then a program on different jurisdictional levels of oil and gas regulation on May 12th, with a panel that will include Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission Director Matt Lepore in Greeley, May 12th. And now, our final speaker in FrackingSENSE 2.0. Back in 2002, the Center American West gathered a group of very interesting people together for a workshop on energy. We met for 2 days, we had an extremely lively discussion, and the result was an influential Southern American West publication in 2003, What Every Westerner Should Know About Energy. A knowledgeable and wise friend, who happens to be directly on my sideline, Matt Silverman, he suggested to me that I should recruit Josh Joswick, a county commissioner in La Plata County, which is to say the Durango area, and this suggestion proved to be a very fine one. Josh is a very lively soul, and his use of language is often very energetic and unexpected. Not that the Southern American West must preserve neutrality in this NSF project, but nobody told me that part of my job requirements in life would be trying to moderate and tame our speaker tonight, so I will not be attempting that. He's a fine storyteller, and the result was, back in 2002, that since that workshop back in 2002, I have been assuming that Providence would be kind to me and would conjure up an occasion when I could ask Josh Joswick back to speak to a lucky audience. Josh and his wife Pam have lived in Southwest Colorado since 1979. He has been a community organizer for the San Juan Citizens Alliance and for Earthworks Oil and Gas Accountability Project. For more than 25 years, he has been a participant observer of events and developments and conflicts and twists and turns in the world of oil and gas development. He has worked with federal, tribal, and elected officials on regulation of the industry, and he has attended more stakeholder meetings than anyone would dare to count. Back in the Southern American West report in 2003, What Every Westerner Should Know About Energy, we broke up a long text with various sidebars composed of vigorous and often humorous commentaries written by individual participants. To give you some foretaste of your evening, I will read a sidebar on page 2, which we apparently wanted to feature it here, written by our speaker tonight, and it is called Energy Fatties, Sweating to the Oldies. And it is important, it's an historian's comment. You must remember this report came out in 2003 when the name Richard Simmons was more common. The exercise guru was people were more familiar with Richard Simmons. Okay, here is Josh Joswick, at that time in office, La Plata County Commissioner. Quote, have you ever tried to quit smoking or drinking alcohol or eating sugar, or just tried to diet? Even though we know that smoking, drinking, sugar, or too much food are just not good for us, these are extremely difficult things to give up. So how do we get people to go on an energy diet? Will some Richard Simmons of energy emerge to lead the way, appealing to our national vanity to coax, cajole, and shame us into not being energy fatties? If you keep hammering at people, they will at the very least shut you out, and at the very most do exactly the opposite of what you want them to do, just to show that they can. So that is a good diagnosis of human nature and its relationship to energy consumption. And so, ladies and gentlemen, our speaker tonight, I think, has the most original and distinctive of FrackingSENSE top titles. So here is Josh Joswick speaking on the theology of fracking. God only knows what's going to happen next.
Good evening. That was quite an introduction. I'd forgotten all about that.
Oh, no.
About the title of my presentation this evening, I think I need to explain why it is not presumptuous to say that I'm qualified to discussing fracking from a theological perspective, as I am ordained in the Universal Life Church and can perform wedding ceremonies. So we can talk about that later, though, if you want. Patty thought it would be good for me to provide some historical context to oil and gas development in Colorado and to touch on lessons learned over 25 years in the fight and how the West Slope deals with the Front Range, what we think of the Front Range, and how much of what has happened there, how much is past prologue. Who said that? There's a question for tonight, past is prologue. And part of this evening's presentation, I would like to comment on some of the presentations that I've listened to that were given here and comments that were made at that point in those presentations. So first of all, I'd like to start out with history. And fracking, while that is one of the big buzzwords right now, and as it should be, as to what's going on in Colorado with development, it's a little bit too narrow a perspective in terms of confronting the totality of oil and gas development. So, like I say, it might be interesting and helpful to hear some history before we talk about what's ahead. My experience is with local government and working with /fighting the BLM, the EPA, COGCC, the State Health Department, and I would include the Southern Ute Indian tribe, but when you're a county commissioner from a small county, you do not fight the Southern Ute Indian tribe. Here on the Front Range, you have an advantage over us because basically you have one regulatory body, the state, to deal with. Now, the state is still the state, and they can be contrary, and they can be pro-industry, and they can be oppositional, but at least the focus is not diluted or diverted. And here's an example. Down in southwest Colorado, we have a problem in our airshed, which I'm not telling you folks anything you don't have a problem with, but down there we also do. But to address those issues, we have to deal with 3 separate EPA districts. The Region 8 out of Denver, Region 6 out of Dallas, and Region 6 out of Dallas, which oversees New Mexico, and Region 9 out of San Francisco that oversees development on tribal lands. Things can get out of hand in a big hurry when you're trying to deal with 3 separate EPA regions. So the brief history of Southwest Colorado experience is that what happened in La Plata County in Southwest Colorado, Northwest New Mexico, is now it's happening here on the Front Range. And in La Plata County, we sit on the very northern edge of the San Juan Basin, which is a treasure trove for coal bed methane, which is a lot different than shale development, but it's still, there's a lot of gas down there. And we'll call that CBM. Back in the 1980s, in the eyes of the federal government, CBM was considered an alternative fuel, not by virtue of the fact that it was natural gas, but by virtue of the fact of where it was in the coal seams, because those had never been developed. So by virtue of the fact that it was an alternative fuel, it qualified for federal tax credits. And so driven by federal tax credits and by the Southern Ute Indian tribe's desire to develop its resources, the rush was on. And because it was a federal action, we called for a basin-wide environmental impact statement, an EIS, to be done before development began. That was when I started learning about bureaucratic finger pointing, because that wasn't going to happen. And nothing happened with the EIS, and then everything began to happen with development. CBM was a laboratory-proven technology. It was a theory. And in La Plata County, that was where the theory hit the real world. And that's where the wheels started falling off the wagon. People were lighting their faucets back in 1990. I'm glad that Gasland has that in it. Then it's unfortunate that it's happening here. It was happening back there in the 1990s. A prime trout fishing blue ribbon section of the Animas River was posted with enter at your own risk, and prolonged exposure could result in death. This is because of hydrogen sulfide accumulations because of development. We have a coal seam fire down there that's been burning since 1998 with no signs of stopping. A house blew up. Other people had houses with so much methane seeping into the crawl spaces that it was no longer safe for them to live in these houses. After analysis was done by its hydrologists, Amoco bought out 7 of the houses with no admission of cause language and non-disclosure language in the agreements. They were just being good neighbors, because that's what good neighbors do. And their hydrologists' findings, that was what led to a new field in hydrology called hydromythology. Because that was what they found. And the state, to its credit, found something different. They found causation. But be that as it may, so La Plata County was the first county in the state of Colorado to get local oil and gas regulations. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. We were sued, went all the way to the Supreme Court, Colorado Supreme Court, where it was found that, that local governments actually do have the right to exercise their land use authority over the development of oil and gas. That was a huge deal. That was back in 1992. Then in 97, both COGA and the state sued us again over our regs, and again we prevailed. So I bring that up to point out that it's not new for the state to sue local government. It's been happening. Now it's happening up here. That doesn't make it any less disturbing that we have a governor that has decided to go down that trail. For some reason, the assault on local government continues. And right about now, people start getting kind of glassy-eyed when I continue to talk about La Plata County, so we're going to move on. From the perspective of an elected official, which is what I was, I am a recovering elected official, albeit a bottom feeder, having been a county commissioner, which essentially means that you are on the front lines. Whether you're in the city council, county commission, you're on the front lines. I would like to comment on the dynamics of being of elected officialdom and in the ideal, when you are elected to office, if you have any sense of fairness or in a relatively intact moral compass, you want to listen to both sides of an issue, because there are at least two sides to every issue, if not more. And then you render judgment based on reasoned consideration of the facts. At least you should. Because if you've been paying attention, you see what happens to elected officials that don't do that. You see the kind of decisions that they make. Now, when you're elected to higher office than bottom feeder, meaning that if the dynamic changes, you're no longer on the front lines, you receive a certain degree of insulation. So let's take a random example, an issue, let's say oil and gas. Because when you're not on the local level, when you reach state or federal level, you end up talking to people who are usually very nice people. People, in fact, with tact, people who you could have a couple drinks with and not end up out in the parking lot going MMA on each other. These people want to become the face of the industry in your mind. They're not the landmen bullying landowners into signing leases that are not in their best interest. These are people that you can talk to, people who might even shake their heads with a little embarrassment that such things as lawsuits against local governments actually happen, such things over which they simply have no control. Just one of those facts of life. And because you want to hear all sides, you listen and give weight to the arguments and work to understand the increasing number of subtleties involved in the issue. And even if you're a U.S. Senator, which I think we've had at this podium, you can end up thinking that there is truth attached to statements like huge strides have been made to assure the balance between impact and need. And the industry is spending a lot of money on meeting community expectations. You start thinking that those things are true and you shake your head in frustration. Because as Dennis Lehane says, people prefer sides to subtleties. Then the edges blur. The issues start to blur. And more likely than not, you see the face of citizen frustration, and it's emotional, and you start to think, how much is enough for these people? Can you ever satisfy them? These are people that can never be satisfied. And you compare them to the lobbyists, polished, smooth, having a martini. In presentation, how things are presented to you, that starts to matter. So it's not exactly equivocation, but it becomes giving equal weight to arguments that are not equal. And from that arises the myth that the scales are equal, that both sides have equal leverage in this fight. And somehow the industry becomes the victim of uninformed mobs carrying tiki torches and pitchforks, storming the bastions of reasoning, the regulatory agencies and legislative bodies, and both sides do not have equal leverage in this fight, and they never will. And I would argue it is not the job of elected officials to see that industry interests are not harmed and as development proceeds unimpeded. So what would a presentation on theology be without a discussion of mythology? I already alluded to some mythology, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the mythology of local government versus state regulation. And the industry will adamantly state the need for uniformity of regulation, and that local governments regulating them will cause chaos, and local governments cannot regulate within their jurisdictions. Now, first of all, local regulation will not create an unnavigable maze. It just won't do it. It's very simple to learn codes that will essentially be the same from community to community. Communities will sit there and they are not going to start from scratch. They're going to take templates and modify those templates, but essentially the regulations will be the same regulations. So second, as Barbara Green said when she was up here, that local governments are well within their authorities to regulate within their jurisdictions. If the impacts of oil and gas development happened on one 400-acre parcel of land in a municipality or in a county, there would be no question that that government would have the ability to regulate or maybe even stop it. But it doesn't. It happens on 400 separate acres of land, or 200 separate 2 acres of land. It is spread out all over the place, and that is where the confusions come in. Because why would a government possibly want to deal with cumulative impacts of this and this and this? Because they are not cumulative. They are individual. That's what's presented as logic. Local jurisdictions do have problems, however, when they try to do this. And one of the problems is they can be overwhelmed by threat. Because if you are a small municipality, even a large municipality, and you have the industry standing in front of you saying, if you do anything, that's fine, we're going to court. We have a lot more money than you do, and trust me, it's going to hurt you a lot more than it's going to hurt us. There are those fiscal considerations. It's also a new area of control. Do these governments actually want to get into some place they have never gone? It's a consideration that a lot of them take. And oftentimes they're diluted by the potential for revenue enhancement. Yes, they will make some money for that. Will that compensate for the impacts to their communities? I would argue it doesn't. Then there's also the myth of self-regulation. The industry does not need to be regulated, it will do it itself. Here's an example of why that's a really bad idea. In Ohio, a company was found guilty of dumping 20,000 gallon storage tanks, plural, into a storm drain using a hose. The water, laden with saltwater brine and toxic oil-based mud from drilling and full of pollutants like benzene and toluene, eventually ended up in Ohio's Mahoning River. The company's president testified to dumping the waste at least 20 times between November 2012 and January 2013, 3 months. That's according to the Cleveland Plain Dealer. In his mind, in the president's mind of this company, that was the best management practice. You'll hear that a lot. We have best management practices, we can deal with this. And if left to their own devices without regulation, this is how companies would operate. This is self-regulation. You get rid of it. It's cost effective. So you get to the myth of regulation. There are two schools of thought on that. First one is regulation is merely negotiating the terms of surrender, meaning that you start regulating it, you've already said, yes, we're going to allow it, now it's just going to be how. And that is negotiating the terms of surrender, and that is not acceptable. We need to stop it. That's one school of thought on that. That's led to local and statewide calls for bans on fracking. The other school of thought is regulation is critical. And what people who feel that way about it say that until, through political will or community action, we're able to stop fracking and transition to renewables, applications for permits to drill will continue to be let, wells will continue to be drilled, the resource will continue to be developed. And you simply can't rely on that being self-regulated. Strong regulation and the will to enforce it is what's critical. The third myth about regulation is that if you regulate us, the industry says we will leave the state. I've been at this long enough to hear that since the early 90s. And I've seen a lot of regulations, local, statewide regulations adopted since then. That argument has always been the same. has always been has always been brought up by the state, and they're still here, still prospering. So I think we can put an end to that myth. So let's talk a little bit about the culture of the industry. There's the Energy Wire, and that's put up by Environment and Energy Publishing on April 9th, last week. They had this story. OSHA has proposed ending the industry's exemption from a safety program called Process Safety Management, which forces companies to adopt a more systematic approach to workplace safety. But industry groups say that the industry says that requiring the industry to meet those regulations would be, quote, cumbersome and it's expensive for the companies. This from an industry whose fatality rate is more than 7 times higher than the all industry average, and that last year recorded a record number of workers lost. Yet cumbersome and expensive are now the standards by which the industry asks whether or not worker protections are necessary. These are the values industry puts on health and life. Cumbersome and expensive. Now where that is on the balance sheet, I don't know. I don't think you'll find that. But trust me, that's one of the main ethics that they now have. Make no mistake about it, the culture of the industry is still, we are here for one reason, and one reason only, and that is not to create jobs. It is not to pay taxes, not to enhance state revenues, not to operate under set of best management practices so the operator's image in the community is not tarnished. That reason is to make as much money as we can for our shareholders, and I've heard them say that. When that is joined, part and parcel to a culture of punitive redress, this is what happens. Noble and Anadarko are touted as very good players. They may be. I mean, I've heard people who stood up where I am now say that, knowledgeable insiders. I believe that I've heard that several times in this series. Yet, these good players are committed to total opposition to any efforts by citizens to assert a modicum of control over what happens in their communities, total opposition to any assertion of democratic process, and total opposition to the results of these democratic processes. As Eric Lotke would say, it is Big Brother Inc. at work. We can talk about the responsibilities of the industry and how if it doesn't demonstrate corporate social responsibility, it will lose its license to operate, and how the industry has become, how it has to become a friend of the renewable community, or else the public will get angry. And that's all well and good as a posit. But real world experience does not lead us to the conclusion that public image matters to corporations that lead assaults on citizen efforts at self-determination, or industries that have cumbersome and effective as their operational ethic. And public image, if you want public image, here's public image for you. Our governor saying, touting the strides that have been made in Colorado to have the strongest set of regulatory rules in the nation. Sidebar on that is, according to Resources for the Future, their report, State of the State Shale Gas Regulations, Colorado does not have that. But that's what's being touted. We're the strongest in the nation. Now, public image on that is that there have been occasions when I've gone to the 55 Plus Center in Durango, which is for the age enhanced. And it is people mostly with very nice ladies, well over the age of 75. Now I can stand here today and tell you, seriously, honest to God, true, that I am the best arm wrestler in the 55 Plus Center. I can put them down. Look at the competition. If Colorado has the strongest set of regulations in the nation, look at the competition. I would assert that the regulations we have are very little to what we could have if regulating the industry was taken seriously in this state. So, the future, that thing rasping under our collective beds, what does await us? One of the things that has been brought up in this series is natural gas as a bridge fuel. This question was asked several times in a couple of the presentations, is it a bridge? And as I remember, that issue was kind of danced around in several of the presentations that I listened to anyway. And I would like to answer that and even give it an explanation as to why I say what I say, that it is not a bridge fuel. And I believe also one of the questions was, is natural gas delaying the transition to renewables? And is the industry putting its muscle behind development of renewables? And the answer to that, in the one presentation I listened to, was that is the hope. That is the hope. Wake up. When you read headlines like General Electric is spending billions on new energy infrastructure, especially gas, spending billions, that should tell you that there is nothing bridge about natural gas development. And there is definitely nothing bridge about oil. Here's another example, pipelines. In its North American midstream infrastructure through 2035, capitalizing on our energy abundance, the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, INGAA, states that an estimated $640.9 billion, with a B, an average of $29.1 billion a year, will be needed to be spent on U.S. and Canadian midstream crude oil, natural gas infrastructure. Another $56 billion on natural gas liquid pipelines, and another $271 billion on gathering lines for oil and mainline pumping and mainline pipelines. This study was prepared for at the Foundation's request, and it said that in all likelihood natural gas prices will be going up will double, if not more, by between now and 2035. In addition, well, it's that sort of rhetoric, that use of language from the INGAA that promotes the idea that we are awash in product, that our energy abundance secures an energy independent future for us and for the next generations well into the next 20 years. And then what? That kind of investment is not a testament to the temporary nature of oil and gas as bridge fuels. That development disincentivizes getting serious about renewables. And coupled with the behavior of shale wells, which is what you have up here, and their characteristic rapid decline, they will start out very strong, they decline. How do you justify that kind of investment in infrastructure? Because that's sizable. You justify it by drilling more wells. Keep that product going through something that you have put an investment in. So a final thing about pipelines. If you want to control development in your municipality, regulate pipelines. And that's a presentation as long as the one I'm giving tonight, which I'd love to give you some time. But I will say it's one that can work. So what else is in the future? Bonding on the state level. I would say that until the state gets serious about addressing issues like this and addressing issues about comprehensive review and regulation that address public health, concurrent with the stoppage of development until those studies are complete, and stoppage of extraction until those studies are complete, it's going to be business as usual. And what does that look like for the future? That's where we come to bonding. So let's talk about bonding. Booyah, boy, wake me up when this is over. I'll try not to, it can get pretty wonky pretty quick, but I'll just be brief about it. Currently, the state, if you are an operator in the state and you operate fewer than 100 wells, you can post a statewide bond for $60,000. Reclamation bond, plug and abandonment bond. That covers those fewer than 100 wells. If you have over 100 wells, you can post a $100,000 bond that covers anything over 100 wells, 800 wells, whatever you have. It defies logic to think that anybody would, if you have 150 wells, and say it costs $50,000 to reclaim each well, that you aren't going to look at that $100,000 bond and go, geez, we're going to lose $100,000 if we walk on this. Bonding is a huge issue, and that is going to be one that is going to haunt us as this proceeds, because as they continue to develop under these bonding requirements, that is what the legacy is going to be. It's going to be wells that people have just walked away from. It's deferred accountability is basically what it is. That is something that the state can deal with. That is what needs to be dealt with legislatively or regulatorily. That's the importance of regulation. So what's the most productive strategy to deal with the industry? And basically that beats the hell out of me. I have dealt with them a long time, and I've seldom seen the industry make any serious attempt to deal with anyone or any group in good faith, unless compelled to do so by the courts, or to deal with issues proactively from any position that it did not enhance its own position. They're not altruistic, and they are very particular about who sits across the table from them when the negotiating begins. Look at the assault on local governments that we've seen up here in the Front Range. Look at the proposed legislation in this year's legislative session. Look at the recriminatory ballot issues that are being proposed by the industry, and the industry so far committing $2 million to fight citizen initiatives. So how do you deal with that mentality? You don't back down. You don't cave when threatened. And you try to take the offensive whenever possible, and not be surprised if there's pushback, because there will be pushback. But I think we need to look at what we did this year with Senate Bill 93, which was a bill that would have given pipeline companies the right of eminent domain, which was a huge deal, which means that they could have gone wherever they wanted to go and condemn property. There's a little more to it than that, but that's what eminent domain is. It just gave them the freedom to do that. Well, it was stopped. We did that. Not me, but citizens did that. Citizens got people on board, talked to legislators. There was a big campaign to say, you can't do this. You can't give this power to a for-profit industry. Because basically what that power has always been reserved for is for governments and utilities. This would have gone well beyond that. Involvement works. And you also, when you have to talk to the industry, if you're given an opportunity to talk to the industry, you go and you talk on that hope that burns eternal within the human breast that this time it might matter. When you do something like what's been done in Lafayette, Fort Collins, Broomfield, Longmont, where else? Boulder, of course, yeah, that's right. Then you see the true face of the industry and how much it matters to the industry to quash any and all opposition or any and all resistance and put down anybody who stands up. And you see people standing up. In spite of that, you see them standing up. There are similar citizens' uprisings everywhere. Wisconsin, the latest one, was up in a place called Kitimat, British Columbia, where last week people in a non-binding plebiscite, a non-binding vote, voted 60% against a proposed $7.9 billion Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline project, despite the massive spending by Enbridge to promote the project. 75% voter turnout. That's not bad. That's representative. That you can say, yeah, people are voting against it. Now it's up to the Kitimat District Municipal Council to take an official position on this. The people stood up and spoke out for what they wanted. It'll be interesting to see what happens with their elected officials. When you get involved in oil and gas, in an oil and gas issue, you quickly realize that mostly all you have for technical analysis of that issue is generated by the industry. Because that's who the people, that you're not going to, you're very seldom going to find a petroleum geologist that doesn't work for the industry. And yet this analysis is accepted as non-biased by state and federal agencies. And when everything that is not generated by the industry, anything that casts doubt or raises questions about potential negative health or environmental impacts, fetal abnormalities from people living in proximity to natural gas wells, water and air impacts, general health impacts because of disposal of production water, that is immediately attacked and dismissed as inconclusive, not valid in the process or in the conclusion. Is it any wonder that people who are confronted with impacts get real jaded, real cynical, real quick about being treated like children, about being patted on the head and told, don't worry about something that you don't understand, trust us. Well, what people should understand is the two words, cumbersome and expensive. That's what you need to understand, among other things. ExxonMobil is agreeing to share more data on fracking risks. According to Reuters, the company would report on risks surrounding disposal of fracking wastewater, air pollution, methane emissions from oil and natural gas wells. And the spokesman for the company said, we understand people have concerns. This activity is somewhat new. Well, they said it's been around for a long time, but in this case it's new. And now, and it's not understood in some parts of the country. People want more information. The more they know, the better. Well, it will bear watching as to what this report says, how it's received, will it be peer reviewed, and will it then become the final word on the matter? I don't know. That seems to be what happens, but it is industry generating industry numbers, generating it from an industry perspective. So let's talk a little bit about the West Slope, which is where I'm from. Now on the West Slope, people, don't take offense at this, but view the Front Range with a cocked eye. Kind of look at you a little bit like this. Because there's a history in that relationship. And as an example, back in, I think it was 2007, 2008, House Bill 1375. 1375 was going to require power plants on the Front Range to stop using coal and begin using natural gas. And that's a noble sentiment. I mean, more power to you. In the aftermath of 1375, there was a person, I don't see her here this evening, she's from Boulder, came to Durango and touted natural gas as the clean energy future for us. And that was before shale development hit up here. Now, don't get me wrong, there's no argument that the air up here should be cleaned up. Hell, it should have been cleaned up 25 years ago, but you deserve clean air. That's not the issue. The issue was, what rankled us was that cleaning up Front Range air would be done on our backs, because that was where the natural gas was coming from. That was where the impacts were going to be. It would be on the backs of the people of La Plata, Mesa, Garfield, Rio Blanco counties, down in Los Animas County. But the argument was that development should go where there are fewer people, okay? And we, on our backs, we should be willing to take one for the team. It's not unusual that that opinion changes when suddenly it's in your backyard, impacting your air, affecting your children and your communities. But it's okay as long as it's not on my back, is a perspective with which I take issue. Back in the early 1990s, Southwest Colorado most of the West Slope, became a national sacrifice area. Not to be trite, but that's what it was, national sacrifice area. Now you too, up here, are a national sacrifice area. You're being asked to take one for the team. Now you have to consider the equation. Do national benefits outweigh the impacts to neighborhoods? So the question that West Slopers have been, the questions that West Slopers have are, will the Front Range be with us as it impacts our neighborhoods too? Or will the view be parochial? Up here, you have the population base that we didn't have down in southwest Colorado. You have proximity to the capital. You have access to legislatures, multiple legislators. La Plata County is 350 miles from Denver, and that generally works in our favor. But we are a very small, easily dismissed voice. We're 350 miles away. You have a voice we don't have, we didn't have. You have that voice, and now that voice is reaching out beyond individual communities where they have done something for themselves, those individual communities, and that voice is working on bigger fixes, statewide fixes, whether it's bans or community rights, the rights of communities to determine what can happen within their jurisdictions. They're working on to stop the travesties that the industry would perpetrate on this state. And West Slopers hope that this new voice, this Front Range voice, speaks for us too. Now you're the national sacrifice area, and you had better realize that you're in this for the long haul. We've been in it for 25 years. You're in it for the long haul. As the poet said, this ain't no place for the weary kind. You've been pretty good listeners tonight, thank you. I guess I never really talked about the theology of fracking. I had something, but I even questioned whether it was appropriate or not, so I don't think I'm going to go into it. But the theology of fracking was, I guess it was just, hopefully you would come and say, what the hell is he talking about, the theology of fracking? I won't give you the full thing, but it's basically a faith-based activity. Fracking is. I guess some people look on it with awe and reverence because there's no scientific basis for claims that fracking does no harm. But since when does scientific basis, when's that been stronger than belief? There's no scientific basis, yet it's through faith. That rejection of the evidence, it's through faith. In the industry's claims that it does not harm us, it's through faith that we look upon fracking as our salvation. The industry said it, it has to be so. Fracking is an immaculate idea, a conception of immaculate nature, pure and unsullied, conceived in the pursuit of enhanced profits. It's had a flag wrapped around it, so now you have a trinity of petroleum, profit, and patriotism. And if that doesn't get you to your feet shouting PTL and amen, there's nothing more I can say to you tonight. So thank you very much.
I do feel I've been to church. Will there be a hymn or shall we?
Well, I can sing for you if you want.
Okay, maybe you might look forward to that another occasion. So I'm going to go through some of these questions here. Some folks are, and I should say we do have a lot of my students here, so I hope some of these, I don't know if these are the writers of these questions, but if we could just go back to a basic here. What is fracking?
What is fracking?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
How's it done?
Fracking is the introduction of fluids under high pressure into formations that will not release the oil or gas that's in them without stimulation. How about that? That was a pretty good off-the-cuff sort of definition. What you do is and not to belabor this, but like I said early on, coal bed methane is a lot different than shale development. There is some fracking in coal bed methane, in coal seams, but by virtue of the fact that the coal seams are pretty soft and pretty porous and pretty permeable, what you need to do with fracking in those is significantly less than what you need to do in fracking in shale. So you have shale that's like a hard substance. Take a brick and magnify it by 10. It's hard. You got to break it up in order to get the gas. So that's what they do. They put frac fluid, they put it under high pressure into the formation. That breaks up the formation. They can then extract what they're going after, whether it's oil or gas. That's why they need to do the fracking in shale anyway. Does that answer?
That's good. Who is most in charge of the fracking?
Well, it would be the companies. The operators are the ones who are most in charge of the fracking. Now, they're the ones out there online, if that's what the question is. They're the ones out there in the field actually performing the operations. They're the ones in the field actually pulling. See, okay, and I should have said too, with fracking, they introduce these liquids down hole, and then they extract some of them. They pull this water back up. Now, in some cases, they're using 2 to 5 million gallons of water per frac. They're pulling this water back up, roughly, or this fluid back up, roughly half of it, so half of it stays down there. The fluid they pull back up is not just water, it has stuff that they put down there, whatever that is, because while we do have rules on fracking as far as disclosure of chemicals in this state, the industry can also claim trade secret, so they don't have to disclose what they're putting down there. But what comes back up, also it is the frac fluid plus whatever it is that they found down there. And I bring that up by virtue of saying that I don't know about the analysis done here, but in Pennsylvania, where they're also dealing with shale development, they are finding, coming back up, that they have activated what they call naturally occurring radioactive material, norms. That's coming back up. They didn't go down, but that's what they stirred up down there. That's what they're extracting back up. That's what has to be disposed of. So that's who's in charge of it, is the industry, with kind of an honor system from the state. There are some hands up out there, and I didn't know whether you wanted to.
Our custom is to read through the questions so that I can get as many in as possible, and then if we have time after we've gone through the questions, we'd shift to that. But please keep writing questions and hand them in. What we are now, we have several versions of why should we care, and one of them is kind of a theological approach to that. So maybe I should add that one. 2 versions of why should we care. Realistically, we are destroying why should we care? Realistically, we are destroying the planet, and it doesn't look like we can go back. We should just use our resources.
That's a perspective. I don't agree with that. I think, I can get, believe me, I go through periods of my life where I just get very cynical about it and go, why bother? I've been doing this way too long. It's somebody else's fight. What should I care? I suppose if you're of a nature not to care, that's your call. I personally, one of the main things was this isn't the best environmental reason for getting involved in it, but personally, I could not stand the bullying. That bothered me, and that's what you confront. So that's a reason to care. I don't like to see people getting bullied and pushed around. As far as the environmental impacts of this, who am I to say whether it's too late? I'm hoping it's not too late. I believe that we've got to put more. If we continue to extract, read any of the reports that come out, the latest United Nations report, the IPCC report, any of that stuff. Yeah, it could lead you to the conclusion of why bother? It's too late. Let's go party. I don't accept that. I think that it is not too late to do something about it. If the minute you stop showing up at the legislature, at the OGCC, at these meetings, at any place where you can show up and make a difference to fight House Bill 93 or whatever bill, when you stop showing up, they win. And if that's okay with you, then that's your call. It's not okay with me.
What do you mean by regulation? What does regulation entail?
Anything from where a well is placed, to how a well is cased, to how a well is abandoned, to the kind of emissions that are permissible, to the way wells are bonded, to road impacts. The OGCC is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. The OGCC is the regulatory state agency that deals with the oil and gas industry. And they have, 100 some odd pages of regulations with dealing with a lot of different stuff. And regulation is only as good as your commitment, the political will, your commitment to enforce it. I mean, you can have 1,000 pages of regulations. If you're not going out there and doing anything about it, la-di-da. But that basically is what, how something is fenced, what a setback from a school can be, what a setback from a house can be, where a pipeline could go. It's those sorts of things that you can regulate, and that they do regulate. How effectively, I don't know.
Here are a couple of questions that seem to be headed towards what is your plan or alternative to our current customs. So I understand the need for renewable resources. However, because of the low energy output of renewables, don't we need to balance our consumption needs with both renewables and non-renewable resources? And I guess I push that with a couple of the other questions to just Chuck Kutcher from NREL's plan. I mean, what is your
right? Yeah,
or massive drop in consumption, and how would that occur, or where's the plan?
Yeah, well, and I think it's all of those things combined. It's there's conservation, and there's the switch over to renewables, and I guess the point I was trying to make in terms of renewables is that as long as you have available, inexpensive, supposedly unending supply of non-renewables, of fossil fuels, of things that we use now, what incentive do we have to switch to renewables? And the large part of that is the technological, just what the question said. The technology isn't there yet. Well, the incentive to develop that technology, maybe that needs to be enhanced. There was, if I understood, one of the presentations here in the series was talking about, I think it was about how fracking was one of those things that was developed in conjunction with government aid, with government help. That technology was enhanced by the government. Well, the government better get serious about doing something about renewables. And yes, I mean, believe me, I'm realist enough not to say that, yeah, by God, tomorrow we're going to just stop everything, turn it all off, and use renewables. I know that's not going to work. But unless we start getting serious about getting technologies that do work and that can allow us to make the transitions, we are going to continue to dink around until it gets to the point of where now all of a sudden, oh my God, what are we going to do? We're almost out of everything. 2035. Well into the next 20 years.
By giving up fracking, pipelines, and the extraction of oil and gas as a whole, don't you feel that we will be giving up an enormous amount as a country, a chance to establish energy independence, taking money away from our enterprises and development, I guess sort of economic development? What will become of us if we make this shift? And are we talking about, what it's not a word that is really popular and not popular in your usage of national sacrifice zone, but are we talking about serious cutbacks and changes in consumption? And
well, at some point in time that's going to happen. And once again, it's a matter of political will, and I understand that argument. I've heard that before, is that there's the economic argument that, you know, we have all these jobs and we're going to be energy independent, and I don't see that happening as long as we start getting into more and more exports of our products instead of, okay, if you want energy independent, keep it here. Keep it cheap. You know, why do an international market if we're intent on creating our own energy independence? That's never been explained to me how that works. And once again, this is not going to happen. The transition is not going to happen next week. But until we get serious about making that transition and getting people involved in research and development, in the placement of renewables, in transmission of renewables, in developing that industry, it's an industry that needs to be developed, not just one windmill. And that's where I see the transition coming. We've just got to be more serious about actually doing something about this.
This question might have a premise that you would challenge, but how can we support poor communities or communities with fewer economic resources who depend on money from fracking?
I don't know if there are a lot of those that do that. Yeah, and that is the economic argument that you hear all the time, you know, that it provides jobs. And down in La Plata County, I mean, I'll be honest with you, in La Plata County, because of energy development, we got a lot of revenues, county revenues. The revenue came to the county from oil and gas development. There were some jobs that came. A lot of them weren't permanent. A lot of them ended up down in New Mexico, but that's just the nature of the industry. So I can't say that there wasn't an economic benefit to La Plata County from oil and gas development, but what I can say is, can I justify what we made as a county with the environmental impacts that we had because of oil and gas development? And I think that's a hard thing to say, that yes, it justified it. Were those impacts that we had impacts and we paid for them with the money that we got, so it was darn near a wash as far as I'm concerned. And like I said, we still have a coal seam fire that's burning out of control. How do I justify that by saying, yeah, we got money from? So to say that there are poor communities, and that's the argument that is given to struggling counties. We will come in and make you whole. It doesn't work that way. They do come in and create jobs, and then a lot of those jobs go away. And then you're left with maintenance jobs, which, I mean, are still pay well. It's not a long-term, it's a boom and bust thing. Always has been. And it always will be. So I don't see that as an answer.
Okay, a couple of kind of focused questions here. Doesn't most of the San Juan Basin gas go to California? Why don't we as a state get as worked up about our energy going to California as we do our Colorado River water?
That's a good question. It's one that I ask a lot. If you're going to develop our gas, let us use it. I don't know, I think our gas down there, I think, comes from up here. And our gas from down there goes up to California or Texas. I mean, it makes no sense. And there, I think that there would be sense in the idea of, okay, it's developed here, let's use it here. That might have some sense to it. But that's not the way it's sold. It's not the way the market works.
Since we all breathe air and it moves beyond boundaries, shouldn't all wells, besides those on federal lands, have a NEPA review?
Yeah, NEPA being the National Environmental Policy Act. But yes, I mean, that's one of the things that we're not doing enough of, is doing those cumulative impacts. Now, on the state level, there is a mechanism where the state could require, or could have required before, and we push for this, some of us, before the shale development up here in the DJ Basin, the Denver-Julesburg Basin, the Wattenberg Field, before that took off, the state had the ability to do a comprehensive development plan, which could have included things like that, and they chose not to. So it is one of those things that could be done. It would be difficult for I've had enough experience with the federal government to know that they are not going to exercise NEPA off their lands. But the state could. The state could initiate that kind of process.
How much of the eminent domain rights were carried out by these for-profit companies? How much land was seized? Not totally certain.
Well, that was one of the arguments, was that private companies have always had those rights to eminent domain. And that was from, I can't remember what the name of the statute is, but they're saying it's 100 years old. They've always had it. And I don't agree with that. That is not how I read the statute. The way I read the statute is that that local government or governments and utilities have that right. Now, what has happened is that, at least down there, and I'm sure up here, is that the threat of eminent domain has been given to landowners. The threat that we will come in and we're going to pay you X for this, and you either take that or we're going to court. And I will guarantee you, most every person that they came to was not in the financial position to go to court over this. So it was the threat of eminent domain, not necessarily the exercise of eminent domain, that was the biggest problem. So, what we have always argued, for a long time, we argued that you do not have that right. And down in Durango, I know of at least 2 cases where somebody actually did say, no, you're not going across my property. And they won. They didn't go to court, but they pushed it. And they stopped it. So that, I think, is the answer to that question, is that it was the threat rather than the actual exercise.
What is your opinion on Senate Bill S. 1135, which will amend the Safe Water Drinking Act and place fracking back under EPA regulation?
Yeah, boy, I don't know that act. But if that, I'm going to have to pass on that. I don't know what it says.
Okay, we're a purple state, and Governor Hickenlooper is pro-fracking, but we risk deposing him at the risk of seating a bigger pro-frack, or do we risk deposing him at the risk of seating a bigger pro-fracking Republican?
Yep.
Could you speak to the situation of the relationships could you speak to the authority of La Plata County versus that of the Southern Utes and the political dimensions of that?
Sure. We are one of 3 counties in the state that has a sovereign nation in it. And that's what the Southern Ute tribe is a sovereign nation. To the west of us in Montezuma County, the Mountain Utes are a sovereign nation there. Now it's different in La Plata County because we are, the Southern Ute reservation is a checkerboard. So instead of one contiguous block of land, here's La Plata County, and there's a line running east and west that's the northern boundary of the reservation. Everything below that's reservation. But within the reservation, you have private land, you have tribal land, and it's all mixed up together. So it gets real complicated real quick in terms of things like roads. Who maintains the roads? What about law enforcement? They're a sovereign nation down there. And that is one of the things that they've gotten very good about asserting, is their sovereign nationhood. And that definition continues to evolve. So while La Plata County ostensibly has some regulatory authority down south of what we call the line, which is the northern exterior boundary, while we do have some authority down there in some areas, it's a very gray area. But it was very clear to us made very clear to us early on by the tribe that the only ones they had to talk to were the federal government. That was the federal government. They didn't have to talk to the state. They definitely didn't have to talk to us. It was the feds. And then we would talk. So, it was a relationship that we worked very hard to develop. And that has taken a very long time to develop that. And just here recently, it was a wonky but huge thing, that very positive thing that we've been working on for 16 years that finally took place with our roads. And so it's something that really you have to pay attention to, because they are a presence, and they've been there for a long time. They're going to be there for a long time, and they're a huge economic driver in the community. They're the biggest employer in La Plata County. They have done extremely well by developing their coal bed methane resources. More power to them. They've done, their tribe is now extremely well to do, very well off. Their members are taken care of.
If the industry were criminally culpable for some of the damage they do, would that change how they operate?
I would assume it would.
Why are we the ones who bear the cost of regulating and monitoring, especially given the profits? Well, the obscene profits, to use them. Or observed. I thought it was observed profits, but that would probably be obscene. Obscene profits. Okay. Sorry, I got confused.
Something about obscene profits.
Obscene and observed are really confused, and I must say they probably shouldn't be confused for good reasons. There. Why are we the ones who bear the cost of regulating and monitoring, especially given the obscene profit?
Well, we're the ones that need to do that. I mean, if we don't have the monitoring, if we don't have the regulation, then that devolves into self-regulation, which doesn't work. So it is up to the state or local government to regulate. Now, does the industry pay enough into the state coffers to justify that? How much are we paying? How much does the industry pay? And that I can't tell you, but that's just the cost of doing business. Now, the other side of that is that if the industry were to pay everything that goes into the OGCC, then you might look at it and say, well, wait a minute, they're being paid by the OGCC. I mean, the OGCC is being paid by the industry. So, where's the objectivity? And, so it gets, there are some fine lines that get drawn there, but I guess the answer is that's what government does. We pay for that.
Why are we still subsidizing fossil fuels?
Beats the hell out of me. I say that. Because it's a very powerful industry. It's one of the most powerful industries on earth. They have a great lobby. They get subsidized. It makes no sense. Don't ask me why we're doing it. If we gave and that gets back to the renewables issue. In my mind, if we gave the renewables industry a pittance of what we get to the oil and gas industry, we would see advances.
It sounds like the companies behind this are just too powerful and too determined to carry on. What can we, well, in fact, this is a question that came in earlier, and maybe you covered much of this, but what can we do as individuals? What can we as individuals do against that kind of force?
Well, as individuals, probably not a whole lot, but as groups of individuals, getting involved in organizations, finding your citizens groups, like they did in Longmont, like they did in Lafayette, when they did, Fort Collins here in Boulder, when you did ballot issues, when you show up at the legislature, when you show up at the OGCC, as an individual, unless you are an individual who happens to be a U.S. Senator, you probably aren't going to accomplish a whole lot. You got to get involved.
Why don't we hold oil and gas to the true cost of fracking, environmental damage, road damage, healthcare costs?
Again, they're a powerful industry. And that's what we continue to try to do, is to get that true cost attenuated to development.
Do you think that the numerous wildcat and abandoned wells throughout the state pose a potential public health hazard?
Yes, I do. And that goes back to that whole thing about bonding. I mean, to take it a step farther, that goes back to bonding. Because what you're looking at is the eventual, I mean, wells devolve. So say in our case, one of the big operators down in our area is BP. And I will guarantee you that BP will look at these wells as they start to deplete. And there is a point at which they will look at that well and say, we're selling it. That well is no longer, and somebody will buy it. And then that will devolve down into where it becomes a stripper well owned by some guy in a pickup who will sit there and go, that there's mine. And does he have the ability to come in and do reclamation? And it's the same sort of thing, whether it's abandoned wells, wildcat wells, you need to have something in place so it's not just a hole in the ground that is going to lead to some guy's house blowing up like is what happened in La Plata County.
Based on your assertion that state and national bureaucrats are disassociated from the issue, do you believe that regulation can only occur on the local level?
I'm a big proponent of local. I don't trust big and I don't trust distant. In my mind, that's what government, state government, federal government, corporations, the industry, they're big and they're distant. Because anybody in La Plata County who works for BP, they're not making policy decisions. That's coming from Houston, it's coming from London, wherever it is that they're making those decisions. The guys on the field are not making those. So I'm a big proponent of local regulation because it's something that I've fought for a lot and I've seen it work. You can't discount local, you can't discount state and federal, but I really do believe that you can get a lot of power locally.
Why is the severance tax in Colorado so low in comparison to Wyoming?
Well, that's what the industry wants. It's simple. And that's something that we've worked on, tried to work on. And there are a lot of arguments against that, even from the conservation community. But it's just that nobody in a position to do something about it, whether it's the legislature or the COGCC, has decided that they want to raise the severance tax.
Okay, so, what are your degrees in? Just curious.
I'm sorry, what
are your degrees in? Just curious.
Well, I'm flattered to think that I have more than one, but I have one degree and it's in English.
In English. And then a question to me, I guess, are the Q&A sessions on the podcast? I hope so. Yes, they are. Okay, here's an interesting, this was from earlier on, this might have been clarified for the person, but are you for or against fracking? I don't quite get it. And then, I guess, and also, should fracking be banned in all cases or not? I'm wondering, I think earlier on, I'm just going to annotate that a little bit, that you said that you felt that the process of development should be stopped until things have been studied, public health especially, have been studied more carefully. So at some point, would there be a time where studies might come in? Can you imagine a time where you would have studies that might influence should fracking be banned? Should fracking be, in all cases or not, the person asks, should it be a temporary situation? Are there studies in the future that might shape your position on that?
Yeah, well, I think my comment was that you can have studies, and these studies can go on, and they might be conclusive, they might not be conclusive. I don't know what these studies are going to say, but I think my frustration with this is that the industry proceeds apace. There's no stopping that. It just the wells continue to be drilled, product continues to be produced, and we study it, and we study it. And is it safe? Is it not safe? I don't know. If you listen to the industry, it's safe. If you listen to people who have done some studies, say like over in Garfield County, here whenever that was, 3-4 years ago, they had done the CU public health, the School of Public Health, I think, for CU Denver, did a study on health impacts over in Garfield County. And they did it for the county, and they were right there, they were done. And the county all the county needed to do was say, we accept it. And they were so threatened by the industry with lawsuits if they did that they just backed away. They had put $265,000 into this, and they backed away from it. So we're not touching it. So I guess my point is that do I think yeah, stop it until you find out what's going on with it, because at this point in time, I am convinced that nobody really knows what's happening with this thing. So if you want to get serious about it, you stop it, you find out, and then if, in fact, it is as benign as is claimed, okay, I don't believe it is.
This next question, I have two questions that would be mine, and one of them, since I do have a number of my students here, and the course is a course in critical thinking. So I'm wondering if you could guide my students in where they might be, or where you yourself might be aware of the facts. As you just said, some of the studies still up in the air, where you might be making an assertion and declaration, where you may have moments of thinking, I wonder if I'm certain of that. Could you guide them in where they might listen to you with an element of critical thinking? So for instance, where is the industry in truth actually entirely monolithic and homogenized? Or there might be an occasion of overgeneralization here or there in your thought? And if the answer is actually no, you don't actually think there's any moment for the students to engage in critical thinking, then you can certainly
Well, I'm sure I've overgeneralized. Broad brush. I'm sure of that. Because as you look at this, is the industry monolithic? I think it's monolithic in what its goals are. But you do have, in terms of regulation, the question was asked before about regulation. You don't regulate for the, quote, good operators. It's like any law. Thou shalt not kill. It doesn't apply to somebody who's never going to kill. And so regulation is for those people who are not good operators. And you are going to have some of those. You have a scale. But even those good operators, quote, good operators, I would still say in a broad brush that they are there for one reason. As I said, they are there, and I've heard them say this. They are there for one reason, and that is to make sure that their stockholders get the best return on their money. Now, I would make that as a generalization for the industry. I think that's probably pretty accurate. Then it gets, you go down from there. How many violations does somebody have? I would say those with a lot of violations are probably worse operators than those that aren't. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, that's helpful. Just a couple more items here. The consumption, the gap between the production of resources and the consumption of resources is something we return to in the class and something that we take up in this series. When you were here in 2002, and I do have a wild memory where something will just stick in my memory, Ann Fabian, the professor from Rutgers, asked you if in La Plata County, where concern was very high over the disruption of and disturbance of natural gas production, were you noticing among your constituents a higher level of conservation, of cutback in resource use, of
no.
shift? And that's what you said in 2002, which was
good. Consistent, yeah.
Yeah, but I remember that of thinking, well, good heavens, if the people who are seeing it so dramatically, the impact of consumption, or excuse me, impact of production, if they can't look at their own conduct and get that disconnect closed off, where might we expect human beings to come to that level of...
And I say no, but you have to understand too that the way the geology is configured in La Plata County is that all the developments in the southern part of the county, which is not necessarily the population base, Durango itself is not affected by development because it's outside of the geologic area. So, once again, arguably it wasn't in their backyard, so they hear about it and Yeah, there's some problems, but it's not hitting them right there. And in terms of people changing their consumption habits, I didn't see it. I didn't see, and then you get into, well, why not? I don't know. I don't know why not. You know, I mean, it makes sense that you should start thinking about conservation. But I'm sure there are some, and maybe that's an overgeneralization on my part. I'm sure there are a lot of people that did.
Okay, here is a question that has, well, actually, just two last ones here with this subcategory for me. As a county, this has been much of a summation of your talk here. As a county with a longer history of gas, a longer history of gas extraction, what lessons do you have for Front Range counties that have less experience with energy development? And that probably was your talk.
That was, yeah. Well, I would say that, you know, you can't just let it go unchallenged. The rosy picture will be painted, and it's not a rosy picture. You've got to get involved in this thing. You've got to get out ahead of it. And is it too late to get out ahead of it? Well, yeah, well, you know, I mean, the gap is closing there. I mean, it's almost to that point. But you still need to get involved in it. I mean, it's going to be here for the long term. And that's what I think people have got to realize, is that it's not just going to go away tomorrow. And that's what we've had down there. I mean, you know, since the late 80s, we've had it. And we will continue to have it for quite a while. And there's a good chance that that's what will happen up here too, is that you are now in it. And you better start doing something about it.
Okay. Can a compromise, this one has the topic, finding the middle ground. Can a compromise or middle ground exist between corporate social responsibility and free enterprise?
I guess in the ideal, it could. You know, I just haven't seen demonstrations of corporate responsibility very much, and that all being there would have to be in my mind, there would have to be a significant change in the ethic of the industry before that would happen. And so in the ideal, I'm willing to hope for things just like anybody else. So I would hope that would happen. I would hope that there would be a step up in a middle ground on this. And maybe there's stuff happening there that I'm sure there's stuff happening out there that I'm not aware of. Haven't seen that demonstrated a whole lot over the course of time.
And this last question is mine, and it's really for a sort of a moment of autobiography, because when I saw that finding the middle ground on the topic, I thought, well, that's not going to work for him. And that made me want to ask if you could describe, for your last item here, and then anything else that you wanted to say in conclusion, but have you been migrating around from middle ground to harsher stances, or have you been where you are now for 25 years, or has there been some migration in that?
Yeah, well, I gotta think about that. You know, I guess I haven't mellowed with age.
I see that. I totally got that. But was there? Did you mellow at youth, though? I mean, was there something that?
No, I'm more focused now. I was a little more.
Were you ever mellow? Is really what I'm saying.
No.
Mellow is a ridiculous term, and I can't believe that we're having this conversation. But it's going to be Donovan in a moment. Mellow yellow. It really is here. So
no,
were you
I don't see myself as a raving maniac on things, but I still get upset about when I see things happening that shouldn't be happening, when people getting walked over and people getting bullied and communities being bullied, and you know, that bothers me, and I haven't modulated that at all. I really still strongly believe that it can be done a lot better, and it can be done without the pain of just saying we're strong. What I saw when they first came into our community was essentially, it was that industry ethic of we're here, get out of the way, let us do our job. And I haven't changed from my abhorrence of that value. I still see that happen a lot. That assertion that they're going to do whatever they want to do in order to get what they need. Yeah, that bothers me. I haven't changed that.
Any closing remark or?
I don't think so. I think I've talked enough.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay.